Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Amar. I'm a forensic psychiatrist working in East London at East London Foundation Trust, and I lead our quality system across the organization.
Great. And well, I'm very excited. So my job is really just to open us up and then hand it off to Amar so he can tell us about how this is really done. My name is Dave Williams, and I am an improvement advisor and executive director at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And my job is to work with our leadership programming and the work that we do around leadership, and very heavily in our work around improvement capability. And improvement science. And the way that in our mission, our aim is to try to create improvement of health and healthcare through practical improvement science. And so we try to help people to be able to build their improvement capability. I also, clinically by background, I'm a recovering paramedic. It has been 17 years since I've been on an ambulance in a professional capacity, so people are safe, but that's the space that I come from clinically, and so my original job was doing house calls in cities in the US. So I want to talk to you about this idea of improvement capability, and we're going to talk about two different concepts, the idea of capacity and the idea of capability, which are two different things, and I'll explain those in a second. But as we go along, we're going to talk specifically about thinking about who needs to be developed. So as we think about improvement capability and capacity, a lot of times people think about folks who are going to be doing the improvement work at the front line or at the point of care or where the processes exist in an organization. And those are very, very important people in that process, and we're going to talk about that. But there are a number of other people within an organization that need to be informed about improvement science theories and concepts, that have to understand why it's important to focus in on process improvement, that have to be aware of the ideas of understanding variation. And so it's critical that we think about what is that, the right people getting the right information in the right way. And so we'll think a little bit about who needs to know what and where. And how do we think about looking at our organization and saying, what's that right sort of strategy or approach to go along? Now, the aim of this is that we want to build an infrastructure that continually learns and grows and onboards new people and continues to help us to support doing reliable quality work within our organizations that produces the right outcomes and that does it in such a way that we dramatically reduce or eliminate the potential of patient safety issues. And we want to do that in a defined time, right? So we want to be, as we think about aim statements, we always talk about how good can we be by when, so that we have very clear theory around how do we get to the direction of goodness, as a colleague of mine likes to call it, and do it in a way that meets our needs in the right ways. So the journey to organizational excellence follows a pathway, and anybody that tells you about that journey, they often tell you about the enthusiasm and excitement that comes with doing improvement work. What they don't often tell you, and I think an important piece that's critical to being successful in developing improvement capability within an organizational system, is that it's hard work. It's totally worthwhile work, but it's not easy. It's not something that you can expect to just happen. It's not magic. It's not that you can just go to a class and it all works. It's a process of continual learning. And the first part of that journey is for us to focus in on trying to add capacity of individuals who are empowered with understanding the theories and concepts of improvement science, and who are taught the methods, the improvement methods that support them in being able to do improvement work, and being able to learn and figure out what are the things that make something work more predictably or not. How do we get this to happen so that it happens every time for every patient? For every person that comes into our organization, that comes for our care. So some of that is the training piece, the building capacity. But another part is, how do we build up people to take those skills and things that they learn when they go on to the IHI Open School and they learn about improvement methods, or they go to a training program, or they sit in a meeting like this and they learn new knowledge about a particular tool or a method. How do you take that and then turn that into knowledge and information? How do you turn it into learning? How do you turn it into practice? And that's where, for me, the capability piece comes in. You have to train people, and then you have to bring them into projects and efforts that allow them to be able to apply that work, and in systems that support them to continue to build that capability. And Amar is going to talk a lot more about that as he tells the journey in his own organization. And then once you build it, a key piece then is to think about how do we sustain it? How do we make this the way that we do our work? One of the things that I hear very often, it always kind of surprises me, actually I tell people I don't agree with it, I don't understand it, is when people talk to me about the burden of quality improvement. And usually when I hear about the burden of quality improvement, what I'm hearing is that somebody isn't doing it right because they've made it something extra. They've made it something in addition to the work that we do. And what I describe is that I do quality improvement all the time. As a leader or as a manager, my job is constantly thinking about what needs to be improved, planning for it. It's about keeping control of the things that we do every day and doing quality control and sustaining and making work predictable. And then when I find opportunities to improve stuff, I try to improve it. Right? And when I describe that to people outside of the quality industry, they say that's management. But for some reason, when we train people to do quality improvement methods, they see it as extra. And so we want to make a sustainable system where doing quality is the way that we practice. It's not an extra thing that we do on top of it. It's part of who we are. And so that's a key piece of building a system where quality improvement is part of how you manage your work. I call it improvement science-based management. And then finally, that's when you get to excellence. Excellence occurs when an organization makes it part of their DNA and builds the abilities within people to be able to constantly be focused in on producing high-quality, predictable, reliable, efficient, cost-effective work designed for the patient. So that's where we're going to go here. Now, this was a quote from Aristotle. This actually came from somebody else's slide. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. If you talk to any elite athlete, if you talk to anybody that has become very, very skilled at something, it's because they do it over and over and over again. And they're constantly learning, they're constantly thinking, they're building it into the way that they do it so that it becomes natural, that it becomes part of who we are. Now, earlier in some presentations, I've seen this. This comes from Tom Nolan from Associates in Process Improvement. Actually, it's in a white paper about strategic quality improvement thinking. And it talks about 3 things that are really required to do improvement work. And they're very important as we're building capability. One is helping people to find the will to change the way that we do our work, to help people to appreciate that good can be better and that there's a methodology and an approach that we can get there. So building the will in folks that there's a reason we want to learn about improvement methods, about improvement science, that we want to apply it to our work and get better. There's a need for us to have ideas about how to do that. And actually, one of the most powerful things about improvement methods is the way that it generates ideas. The way that it enables us to step out of the complexity of the work that we're doing and actually be able to learn about the process we're trying to improve, to discover things that help us to appreciate where there are places that we can make changes, where we can adjust things, where we can be creative and think of new ideas. And then the hardest part, I always say, is the execution side. And improvement and building improvement capability is about giving people skills and then giving them the process and the approach and the sort of structure that supports them to be able to do continuous improvement and execute in a way that is rigorous, in a way that continues to challenge our assumptions, that helps us to keep discovering where our opportunities are, and to constantly be focused on understanding the work that we're doing and improving it. And QI falls in the middle. The results that we want fall when all 3 of these things exist together. We can push through and have them be QI be successful, have our results be successful. Now, I want to ground you in a couple of sort of operational definitions. One is the idea of capacity, how much we can fill something, how many people that we can get trained, how many folks that are available to do the work. And then the other is the idea of capability, which is more around how do we empower people to make a difference? How do we help people get to results? How do we help them to appreciate how to take what they learn into a different place? And there's an article this morning, you saw Helen Devon up on the stage. I think she was in the blue shirt. She's going to the Innovation Cities, just as a reminder for folks later tonight. And Helen was, in this article, talks about how a focus on building capacity and capability for improvement is a key strategy It's part of an organization when it's striving for excellence. And so when there was an analysis of looking at healthcare systems that deliver outstanding performance in cost and quality, there's always this common characteristic that there's a systematic approach. Dr. Deming used to say, when people say, I want to improve something, or I want to do it, he would say, by what method? By what method? What's your theory there? How are you going to go about doing this? Every organization that is pursuing high levels of quality has a methodology. They have an approach, and it's systematic. It's embedded in the way that organization works. And so that's one of the keys for us as we think about it. So in some key terms in the way that she describes it here, capacity is having the right number and level of people who are actively engaged and able to take action. And we're going to spend a lot of time focusing in on thinking about that. And then the second piece is, how do we build the capability of those people? The people that have the confidence and the knowledge and the skills to lead change. Right? So I'm not just talking about people who can draw a process map and walk you through and maybe even know what the different symbols mean. Right? I'm talking about people that can use that as a tool to understand a system and how it's working, that can use it as a way to learn together with a team about all the things that fail in that process and all the things that influence that process and how that process interacts with others. Somebody who can look at that and ask questions about, how do we eliminate steps and make it easier? How do we make it so that it works and flows naturally and that it happens without people having to always think about it? Who can take that to others and have them explore identifying ideas where they can test changes. So there's a big difference between building the capacity and training a bunch of people and then building the capability where people can take that training and bring it to their work and develop improvement and develop the muscles that come along with doing improvement work. So there are a few questions that we're going to think about as we go along here. Who will you involve? Is it a few people? Is it targeted groups? How do we go about that? Who needs to know? And what's the dosing that makes sense for folks? What methods do you plan to use when you build capability amongst your team? Do you have a model or framework? And we can talk all day about which model or framework you like. It really doesn't matter. The key is that you have one, and that you all use it, and that you all talk in the same language. And then finally, how do you sustain this? And so we're going to go through this as we talk through the East London experience, and then also come back to it at the end. Now, a couple questions, I've already started to kind of provoke there, are who are the different people within your organization that need to know about improvement? And are you thinking about these people? I encounter a lot of people who never think about executives or managers when it comes to improvement science. They never think about what they need to know or understand. And actually, the comment I always refer back to is, if you go back to the founding fathers of improvement, none of them talked about methods. They talked about leaders. And so not only do we have to teach people about the methods when we're improving projects, we have to teach people about how they support teams that are doing projects. We have to teach people about building strategy and thought processes that support doing strategic work. And we need to think about people that set that constancy of purpose that Dr. Burke was talking about this morning. That was a key, I think it was point number 1 of Deming's 14 points of management. Now, as we think about it, we're going to talk about how organizations should think about how improvement cascades throughout an organization. Some people think about it as being top-down. Some look at it as being something that should come from the ground, that should come from the bottom. And then there are a number of ways of thinking about spreading from the middle. And the reality is that improvement has to go throughout each of these systems. It has to go throughout the organization so that it's coming from all parts. Right? The different levels of the organization need the knowledge that supports them to be able to contribute to their part of improvement in an organizational system. You have to know the right elements of the science of improvement that matter for your role within the organization and how you can both direct it and support it and be a sponsor of significant improvement. It's critically important, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. This is an example that came out of Canada, where one person tried to describe in Saskatchewan province, who are the people in the left-hand column? Who are the people that we need to think about? What is it they need to know? What do we think they might be important, and why? Why is it they need to know that? And this is a good kind of simplistic example, and we'll get into more detail about many of these different roles. You may have seen this, I heard it referenced in a couple of talks, people talking about a formula for thinking about an organization. This was some work that IHI did with Kaiser Permanente a number of years ago. And so when we move from the bigger end of the triangle to the smaller end of the triangle, we're talking about more people to less people, and you'll see examples of this same model as we go throughout, right? So there are people across the organization that have to have a foundational knowledge of improvement science. They have to understand the basic concepts of what we're trying to accomplish. And then there are people that are in the middle that are the ones that are supporting change and sponsoring change, that are the leaders that are making sure that there's the capacity and ability for change. And then at the top, the fewer people are those that are the experts and the ones that have very, very deep grounding in improvement science and are the ones that can support really at a strategic level how to do improvement. This is one way to think about it when we think about improvers. So, this doesn't necessarily include the executive folks, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. So I wanted to lay this as a foundation to kind of think about the way that we're thinking about an organization as a whole. That part of our job is to look at the organization and ask, what are the various people, what are the various roles of an organization that need to work as a system to be able to produce results for patients? And how do we think about what's the right thing they need to know and the right amount that they need to know, and how do we start to build that system? So I've talked about the theory. And now I want to hand it off to Amar, who's going to talk about the practice and show a real example of how this thinking has been applied to an organization here in London and show you some real improvement in action. So Amar, thanks.
Thanks very much, Dave. My task now is to try and show you how at East London Foundation Trust we've tried to take the principles that Dave has just talked us through and applied them in an organization. If you don't know much about our organization, we provide predominantly mental health care, and we started off providing mental health care in the area you're sitting in now, in the 4 boroughs of the East End of London. Over time, we now provide some specialist care to a larger population of North and East London, some satellite services dotted around London, and for the last 2 years, we've been providing all mental health services outside London completely, in Luton and Bedfordshire. But we also provide non-mental health services. So this is community health services and some primary care in a couple of boroughs in London. So a total population of 1.5 million people in our geographical area, a staff group of 5,000 organized into about 300 or so teams. And so the task really is to think about how would we build improvement, knowledge, skill, capability within a workforce and an organization of this kind of description. Several years ago now, we started to think really seriously and deeply about how we could embed improvement science as our operating model, as the way that we worked and the way that we made things better as an organization. And for those of you that come to our organization, you'll see this printed on the walls in our headquarters as a statement of intent, really, of our purpose and how we want to get to our mission of providing the highest quality mental health and community care. The principles behind the way we've gone about doing this are these 4. And we wanted to firstly find a way to make all of our quality improvement work as meaningful to people as possible. We wanted to make some of this really difficult work feel possible. Now, we're using quality improvement to tackle things that we've never been able to solve, so we need to find ways to give people hope and optimism through the process. Thirdly, we want to find ways to make people feel like this work is valued and it's going to stick. And in a world that's continually changing, particularly the health service in England, where there's constant change, we want to make sure that this feels like it's permanent. And that really is a job for leadership and the constancy of purpose that Dave spoke about. And the 4th principle behind the design of our work is to give people the skills and support that they need to be able to solve the things that they really care about. And that's the aspect we're going to talk about now. So this is our driver diagram. As a whole organization, what's our theory about how we're going to get to achieving our mission of providing the highest quality care? And you can see in there that one of the primary drivers is about developing improvement skills, which is exactly what we're talking about today. So most organizations, as they start their improvement journey, they'll be thinking very seriously about how do you build skills, at what scale, who needs to know what. And obviously that's been a real focus for us in the early years of our work in East London. I'll give you the key takeaway points right now, right at the start, and these are they. From our last 4 years of work building skills across our entire workforce and beyond our workforce, these are the things that we have found to be really important. Firstly, we train everybody together. We firmly believe that delivering care is a team sport, and so we teach people together. All professions together, all different seniorities working together and learning together, and that's been really valuable. Secondly, we wanted to try and realign existing resources rather than just create new resources. In a time of constraint, we have to think about doing things differently and not just adding more burden and adding more resource. And that leads on to the next one, which is really at the very start of this work, how can we stop doing the things that add less value and focus on the things that we think add more value? And you'll hear a little bit more about that later in some of the examples of how we've tried to take away work and exnovate, as Maureen would describe it. The fourth one is that we don't just train people up. It's not enough to just train people or send people on training courses. We need to work on all 4 of our drivers at the same time. And as a reminder, the first driver there is about encouraging, engaging, and inspiring people. We need to keep doing that, and we keep spending a lot of our time and attention thinking about how could we keep celebrating the excellent work going on. Another key driver is how do we embed this into daily work so it doesn't feel like it's separate, but part of the way that teams go about their daily work. And the last principle for us is about training people up just in time. You don't want to skill people up and build their skills and confidence without a way for them to deploy that. So we want to make sure we build skills just in time for them to be able to utilize them and then practice and hone those skills in the pursuit of improving things for the people we serve. So we started by trying to understand within our workforce what kind of roles would people play in improvement work. And we started to break this down into different groups and then think about what would each group need in terms of skills and support in order to be able to contribute meaningfully to improving things within the system in which they work. And so we've taken this fairly rudimentary pyramid and started to now think about what they need and how are we doing against that year on year. And obviously, this is a complicated, busy slide, but it is our capability building plan on a single page, as improvement teaches us to do. So it describes for us what we feel the different roles are in improvements, how many people we have in that particular level of the organization or in that role, what kind of skills they need to be able to confidently and meaningfully contribute to improvement work, and how are we going to meet that need, and at what pace, and how are we doing against it. And you'll see at the top there, we've now started to work upstream. So we're no longer just thinking about our people who we employ, but we're thinking also about the people who are yet to join us, the people who are in training, the people who we can influence within their undergraduate curricula, who are then going to come into our organization in a few years' time. And I'll take you through now each of these layers in turn to show you a little bit about the offer we have developed to build skills within this particular group and the role they're going to play in improving things in our organization. Obviously, you're going to have to use a multiple variety of ways to learn. All of us have different ways of learning, and so we want to make sure that we use multiple methods for people to be able to access learning, from face-to-face learning to more discussion and dialogue based, to didactic, to virtual learning, on-demand learning. There are a range of different ways that people can access learning in our organization. I'm going to start off with the place where we started and where many organizations start, which is let's teach those who are actually going to lead the improvement work. So we started by identifying people who were going to lead projects in their microsystem, in the place where they work, and started to build their skills as they learn. And the design of this program has been a 6-month course where they bring a problem and they come in a pair or a trio of people from the team, and they learn as they are solving a problem. So they learn the tools and they're applying it directly to the problem and learning as they go. And obviously we know, don't we, that improvement is not something you can learn in a classroom. It's a habit, it's a practice that you have to refine and hone. And so that's why this particular offering is all about bringing a problem and learning about improvement whilst you are solving the problem over 6 months. And over the last 2 years, we've had nearly 700 people go through this, and it's now an expected requirement for anyone who's in any management role in our organization. We learned very quickly that that level of skill wasn't necessary for everyone. So we had a much larger pool of people who didn't need to have this level of knowledge, who couldn't be released for this amount of time. And so we've started to develop a much shorter offering, 2 half days, which we've called Pocket QI. It gives people in their pocket the bare essentials to get involved. You don't need to be doing any improvement work, you just need to have an interest. And in 2 half-days full of exercises, games, and discourse in a much smaller group of about 30 people, you have some fun with quality improvement, learn the basic skills that you need to get involved. And over the last 1.5 years we've been running this program, nearly 500 people now have gone through this. Our other learning has been about the support structure you need. As you go above a certain scale, a central team can no longer really provide the level of support that's needed once you work at scale. And so we started to develop some thinking about how would we provide really deep skill as close as possible to teams delivering care. And so we came up with this concept of the improvement coach, who would have deep skills in improvement, but also a lot of softer skills about coaching and supporting teams, working together with patients, service users to improve care. And so we have now developed an offering where we take our existing staff from a multitude of professions, and they devote a half a day a week on average to coaching teams in their local area. And over the last couple of years, we now have about 50 people who are trained as improvement coaches in our organization. And this brings the skill really close to the team. It's accessible, it's people that they know and have clinical credibility, who they can come to as the first line of support when they're thinking about tackling a complex problem or want help in their improvement work. We're also thinking very deeply about how do we meaningfully involve the people receiving care and the people who are caring for those who receive care. So over the last couple of years, we've started to really understand what skills and support do we need to give to our patients, families, service users, and carers to help them be part of our improvement work across the entire organization. And so over the last year or so, about 100 people now have gone through a bespoke training offer aimed at service users and carers. And the majority of these people are now actively involved in improvement work. And obviously, they don't need to know the ins and outs of the improvement method. They need to know the basics. They need to know the language, the common language that we all speak now when we're improving things. But they need a lot more help with supervision, coaching, confidence building, understanding what their role would be in a team, and having access to mentoring through the process. And lastly, we also started building internal expertise. So people at the hub of the organization who can act as experts, who can guide the coaches, who are the frontline support, and who can give a much deeper, bring a deeper sense of improvement science knowledge to the more strategic areas of our work. And as we've developed this system and support infrastructure for improvement at scale in our organization, we've started to become a lot clearer about the roles that different people play in improvement. Be clear about the role and the responsibilities, and help people to really think about what this means for the way that they lead care in their system and the way that they behave on a day-to-day basis. And the improvement expert, what we call a QI lead, is a really critical part of that infrastructure, because they guide, they coach, and they support subsystems within our organization. And all of the detail of this you can find on our website if you need it. As Dave mentioned, you can't do any of this work without the constancy of purpose from leadership. And that constancy of purpose comes from really reevaluating what your theory is about how you're going to get better, how you're going to improve as an organization. So our board have regular sessions to think about improvement science and the application of improvement science in the way that we run our organization. All of our executive directors have to take part in the 6-month program and lead a project, sponsor a project as part of their development too. So if I show to you now how this has developed over time, in 2013, before we'd even launched our quality improvement work, we started by getting 4 teams to just have a go at it as prototypes to see what this might bring to the organization. At that stage, we had no team, no resource, no strategic alignment, but we were able to start. And at that stage, the capability that we had was really just 2 people. We managed to free up 2 people to be able to support this. And we started to identify the people who would become improvement experts and develop them as improvement advisors. And we started thinking regularly with the board about what this would mean for our organization if we were to really embrace quality improvement as the organizing principle and as the delivery vehicle for everything we wanted to do. In 2014, we launched our quality improvement work across the entire organization, and our projects grew from 4 to 60. And that meant we needed a slightly larger team then to support this work. So our team grew to 6, of which 2 were improvement advisors, and we started to train our staff now across the entire organization to be able to lead improvement work in their place of work. In this early part of the work as well, we focused a lot on removing things. What could we take away from our teams to give them the space to focus on improving things? And we did a range of things, from a large campaign, which encouraged everyone to think about what added less value in their day-to-day work that they could think about stopping or doing differently. And we started thinking centrally about what we could stop asking people to do. And audit was one of those things that we thought added less value in the organization, so we reviewed that and removed 80% of our audit program overnight. In 2015, as this work has grown, our projects grew from 60 to 120, and it was at this point that our central team realized that there was going to be a limit to the amount of work they could support from the center of the organization, and we started to develop this concept of improvement coaches. And our first group of cohort of improvement coaches were developed in 2015. We also ran our second and third waves of improvement science in action, and so by this stage we now had nearly 300 people trained and using improvement in their teams. And last year, in 2016, we've now grown from 100 or so projects to now having over 200 projects across the organization. So almost every team in the organization is now actively using improvement to tackle a complex problem. And for that, we now find we need a central team of about 18 people, which has a range of skills, from improvement experts to communications and engagement experts to data analytics to program support. We keep running multiple waves of improvement science in action to make sure that the key people who are going to lead improvement work or who are managing teams have the level of skill they need to be able to do that effectively using improvement. And we keep building our cohort of improvement coaches. So the key principles from that 4 years of adapting as we go and learning what we need have been, one, that we need to build skills just in time for the work that people need to do. It's hugely frustrating to suddenly realize that there is a better way, but have no way to really deploy that to make things better. So we really need to make sure that when we train people up and give them the skills, they also have a route to try that in their workplace and permission to have a go with it. The second key point is that I think that the way that we develop improvement skill needs to fit with the design of the way that we're going to do improvement. Our approach in 2014 was to, in one go, involve the entire organization in improvement. We wanted to make sure everyone felt included in it and have a way to be involved in it. But that isn't the only possible design. We could have chosen to just particularly focus on 1 or 2 areas of our organization, in which case our capability building should have focused on that particular area. So I think the design of the way you go about improvement should inform where and how quickly you build skills in the organization. The third is that whilst you need to have a strategic view and a picture of the long term, you need to move quickly. So we have moved very quickly to build skills at pace and at scale. And I think that's important because you need to build momentum and energy with this work. So what impact has it had? And I guess, one of the tensions you face straight away in this work is how much of it should be defined from the top of the organization and how much should really come from what people care about in frontline teams. For me, this has almost become a false dichotomy, because when we have given people freedom to pick what they really care about, and at the crux of it all, our improvement work really does ask people to think about what matters most to them in the place where they either receive care or where they deliver care, and to come to a consensus within their team and to work on that. And we found that when people really have a chance to think about that, there is a lot of alignment between what people care about in their team and what the people at the top of the organization care about. So actually, I'm not so sure that there is a choice to be made between top-down and bottom-up, but there probably is a way to make sure you're staying alert, to make sure that you're engaging and involving people at both ends of the spectrum. And when we've tried to keep true to these principles and given people skills and support, really focused on concentrating our attention as leaders on the bright spots in the organization, celebrating work, giving people the chance to tell their story as often as possible, we found that over the last 4 years, the engagement and involvement in improvement has just skyrocketed, and people keep wanting to be part of this movement that brings hope and optimism to their daily work. Is it making a difference? Is probably what you're asking at this stage. And of the 235 projects we have across the organization now, about 180 or so of those are active at the moment. 48 have been completed, and you can find all of the details of those on our website, completely transparent about what they've achieved and what they've learned. 51 have shown improvement, and of that, 28 have shown significant improvement of the sort that we would now be thinking, is this potentially applicable for scale up and spread within the organization? And I'll pick two problems to highlight here. When we looked at our teams and what they chose to work on, many of them chose to work on physical violence. If you work in mental health services, particularly our inpatient mental health services, violence is part of coming to work. Sadly, it is part of the experience of coming to work, and it is our #1 most reported safety incident. So it really is no surprise that teams chose to work on something that affected them emotionally, and they thought impacted on the recovery of the people in their team, in the ward. And it's also no surprise that it mattered to the leaders, that this was our most reported safety incident and something strategically that we really wanted to solve. And by giving our teams the permission to be able to try new things, come together and learn using data for improvement, we've seen that across the whole organization now, we are able to have a really different view about what level of violence might be possible within our settings, which is hugely exciting. The top graph is a control chart showing you the numbers of incidents of violence that we've seen month on month over the last few years, and you can see there that there's been a sustained reduction across all of our 35 wards in East London, which is truly remarkable. The bottom part of the graph shows you how we do against every other mental health provider in England. So it's not just a reduction we're seeing here in East London, it's also a reduction relative to every other mental health provider in England. And obviously that translates to people feeling safer on the wards, for people having a better experience, having a chance to recover on the ward and leave the ward safely and quicker. The second example I wanted to give to you is the topic of access in the community to treatment. It's something our patients really care about. 3 years ago, we were too scared to even talk to our teams about improving the efficiency in which they worked. Could you see people quicker? Can you see more people? Can you make sure people turn up to their appointments? The initial response was always, if you want us to do all of that, we need more resource. We're going to need more staff, we're going to need more teams. We just can't do that within the existing way in which we are working. But through quality improvement and teams applying the quality improvement method and tools to the way that they work and their systems designed, what we've seen is that a range of teams, from community mental health teams to children's and adolescents mental health services, to memory clinics, to psychology services, all of those teams working together to this common purpose of improving access as part of a learning system across our dispersed organization, using a common set of measures, using the common language of improvement. We have been able to show that we can reduce the time from being referred to being seen and treated, despite seeing an increase in referral volume. So on the bottom left there, you can see that our referral volume coming in, the demand on our services has increased during the same time frame, but we're having more people come to their appointments, so the non-attendance rate has reduced by about 30% there. So that's phenomenal. It's unthinkable that we could have achieved this, and this has been done with no extra resource. It's just through simply understanding our system and process and improving it, using people with the closest and best knowledge of how the system should work. And underneath that system level data is the data from our team. So here you go. Here's all of the data from every team that's part of that collaborative, and all of them are seeing significant change in the way that they can deliver care and provide greater access to their service to the people they serve. And this is the story of what if you build skills and you provide people with the right support, people will feel more able to contribute to improving things at work. This is the data from our staff survey, which in the NHS is done once a year across all the staff who work in the NHS, and us as the red dot there against every other provider in the country. We have seen that over the last few years, as we focus more on building improvement skills and providing constancy of purpose, that improvement is the way that we're going to tackle our most complex challenges. People feel like they have a purpose at work, they feel connected to the work, they feel able to influence the system and make things better, and people feel more engaged. Dave.
Fantastic. So I don't know about you, I mean, I get very excited to listen to an actual story because I can come up and talk to you about the theory, I can quote the page numbers in the improvement guide, I can tell you that these things are important. And some of you will believe me and others will say, gosh, that sounds all great and theoretical, but I can't do that at home. I work in a complex place. And I would imagine that where Amar works and the team that he works with is very complex. It's not an easy process. But what I really appreciate in hearing the description of the story is that you hear the practical nature of building both capacity and capability within an organization. And you hear a number of other things too that I thought were really important. I just want to call out and correct me when I'm wrong. One was that there was a learning journey. I loved hearing the fact that they began with a theory of piloting with some small groups and just getting a feel. And then as they grew more folks that had the tools and some of the skills and knowledge to be able to do improvement, they started to also realize where their limits were or what other capacity they needed to complete or build in folks that could support that work and that learning. Which I think is a key lesson because at some point you're going to realize that you need to create the structures that support the improvement. Also the reflection on the fact that this became a way to do our work versus an extra piece, not adding people, not adding costs, not adding resources, but figuring out how to use these methods to do our work better. Is really powerful and a key too of recognizing it's not just one person's role. So I'm going to try to build a little bit off of this story, going back a little bit to some of the theory pieces and how we kind of go from where we are today to where we might want to be, kind of thinking about some of that journey. How do we work our way there and think in kind of a strategic way? I bring us back a little bit to Don Abedian's classic model of structure plus process equals outcomes, right? We've all heard this and are familiar with this as a concept that we have to build the structures that enable us to be able to provide good service. We have to focus in on developing the processes that support that and are reliable and predictable. And then another piece that colleagues of ours, Doctors Bob Lloyd and Richard Scoville added in, is also to think about the relationship of culture. And one thing that I appreciated hearing was Amar describing how people had pride in their work that emerged from doing good work. So I have a theory that is a key outcome. I've never met anybody who came to an organization and said, you know, I'm going to come in and be really good for 30 days, and then as soon as they're not looking, I'm going to start not doing a good job. You know, like that just doesn't happen. They don't come in and say, I want to be disgruntled. Everybody comes into your organization wanting to do good work. Everybody starts in this profession aspiring to take care of people and to make a difference. And frequently, it's the system or processes around them that chip away at that enthusiasm and that will. An improvement, when done really, really well, when done in a strategic way where we're all thinking about it together and have a shared method and approach in terms of getting to a shared aim, enables us to get back to that joy and to have appreciation of the work that we're doing. And so, if we don't do it well, and if we don't connect with that will to do good work, then that will get in the way of us producing the outcomes that we want. One of the concepts that Amar pointed out, that Don Berwick mentioned this morning, is this idea of constancy of purpose. And it's probably one of the things that I tell leaders the most is critically important to building improvement in your organization. If a leader is confused about how people are acting, I often ask them to reflect on what are the messages that you're sending. Improvement leaders draw focus on trying to develop results, but they don't look at the outcome. They don't point to the outcome and say, you need to get better. They turn to the outcome and say, what are the things that produce that outcome? What are the processes that enable that outcome? And they put their focus on supporting the work to improve the things that produce the result. And they put their attention on supporting and helping and enabling people to do that. So they set clear expectations and goals. They prioritize the things that matter, that are important, both to the patients and to the people at the point of service and to the organization. And they clarify those in a way so that it's clear what's more important than something else, and how do we focus in that direction. They pay attention. They don't just say, this is great. They don't show up on the first day of the training and say, it's so exciting that you're here. Of course, our mission says quality in it. This is going to be great. I want you to do great work. He's a good teacher. And then they walk away. They still show up and they look at those results. They want to hear about the projects. They're asking about the things that get in your way. My boss, Derek Feely, talks about what are the pebbles that are in your shoes? What are the things that you feel every day as you're walking that get in the way of you doing good work? They pay attention. And they establish a system for sharing and learning. How do we make sure that everybody keeps learning? Because there are a number of things that go into improvement organizations. It's learning about the process of doing improvement. It's learning about how do we do it in the constraints that we have. It's learning about the things that might be discovered in one project that influence other projects. It's learning about your own organization and its culture and soul in history. There are things that have to emerge and come back together, and you've got to have a system that brings those together so that we can continue to learn and build. And we need to focus on the system of care. And system is a key word. In improvement science, understanding systems is one of the key principles of being able to make significant improvement. Deming used to describe it as the difference between running an organization like a bowling team versus a symphony. Organizations are interconnected processes, systems of linked processes that work together. Nothing happens in isolation, right? If I make an adjustment over here, something's going to happen over there, and I have to be able to understand how we learn together, how we build systems of care that are integrated, that people appreciate their relationships and their linkages and connections as we go along. So, a key part of doing that is having a method. Now, I mentioned earlier, you can decide the discipline of improvement that you want to do. So I won't come up here and tell you whether you should pick Lean or Six Sigma, whether you should ignore them all and just use an approach like we do at IHI, or we consider all the tools available to us, and we use the model for improvement as a framework to get us started. The important piece is you have to pick a framework, because if you're in Lean, everybody needs to sit down and be able to look at that A3 together and know what it means and why you're doing it and how it connects you back to what you're doing. If you're in Six Sigma, you need to understand the different parts of the DMAIC process so that you can have an appreciation of how things are going to connect together. For us, you'll hear us talking all the time about what are we trying to accomplish, being very, very clear about our destination so that we know exactly the measurable outcome that we're trying to achieve, and that we're going to put emphasis on wanting to do scientific learning, testing ideas and building knowledge through the process of applied learning and testing changes. You got to have a method. You got to have a shared method. If everybody's coming off a different sheet of music, it's not going to sound right. You're not going to be that symphony. The other thing is the sequencing. Amar talked about this in terms of showing you the sequencing across time. We need to be thinking about improvement and start small and figure out how to do it, how to build theory around what works and what doesn't work. So frequently, doing the opposite of what Amar described as the old way of doing it, trying to get everybody involved in one big project. You spend all this time planning, you get what you think is the perfect solution, then you spend all your time implementing it. And you don't learn until afterwards when it doesn't work, or it takes a long time to wrestle it into position. In improvement, we want to start out with an idea, we want to start out with a theory. A driver diagram might be a reflection of that says, this is the system of things that I think will produce these results, and then I want us to learn together by using these tools and methods. And I want us to test changes. I want us to advance our understanding and thinking as we try this in different situations and learn, does it work the same way on day or night shift? Does it work the same way on weekdays versus weekends? Does it work when a nurse does it versus a doctor? What are the things that I need to understand to make this a more perfect process? And we build knowledge as we go along. And then another important piece is, how do we not just make it another checklist or another thing that we do, but that we integrate it in the way that we do our work, that it becomes part of who we are, it becomes natural. So that we know that when we get on an airplane, we're never going to be in the bathroom with the lights off, right? Every time you go in there, you have to move the handle to turn the lights on. We built it into the way that you do your work so that it just happens. And we want to learn about how we build it into the natural process. And we want to make sure that it's also something that can go on and sustain. That when we pull our attention away, when we stop doing that improvement project, it's still there. it's still working, it's still producing the results, that we're able to control the results that we see and do that over time. And so there's a sequence to how we move from an idea in the beginning of a project all the way through to making it an improvement that lasts. One that keeps going, that Shewhart statistical process control chart that keeps going on in time, and you go, we did it, that's great. And this is all informed by data. One of the things that I hope you appreciated that you saw, you may not have appreciated that it was unique or different, but I think it's critically important. Did you notice all those line charts, the Shewhart statistical process control charts? I want you to burn that into your soul. That is one of the most fundamental tools of improvement science. So if you don't see one of those, or if at least the line chart, ask for one. Try to figure out how to start one. Try to figure out what are the data that I should be looking at in my organization and looking at over time. Critically important. Second major part of improvement science is understanding variation. If you can't look at data over time on a run chart or a Shewhart statistical process control chart that have those control limits, you can't fully appreciate the variation that exists. You can't fully understand when something's good or going in the direction of goodness. And you can't fully differentiate between something that's totally predictable and normal in this process you're trying to fix and something that's unique. And there's two different ways that you want to act for those. So look for those and aspire to have those as you're going in your journey. Now, I'm going to reflect back a little on what Amar said in terms of the different groups of people. You know, so when we talk about everybody, we want people to have some basic awareness. We want people to appreciate why improvement is important and how it's different from normal work. We want to focus people's attention on, we want to have predictable and reliable work. We want to be able to learn through doing and trying. We want to have people appreciate that predictable work and reliable work is worthwhile, and here are some of the methods and tools that you're going to encounter. We may also want them to understand that you might find people who are going to do PDSAs with you or plan do study act cycles to try out a new idea, or they're going to post those run or Shewhart control charts up on the wall, and we're going to learn together about how to interpret those, right? We want everybody to have a sense of what they're looking at and to appreciate what the end goal is. And so that's where a lot of people get taught. The Open School was intended to do that in many ways for us. We built the IHI Open School with an intent that we could get a lot of people to understand about improvement. And then there are those people that are going to be doing improvement projects. And Amar talked about the Improvement Science in Action program, which for us was a program that tried to help people to do their first improvement project, to figure out how do I define what it is I'm trying to accomplish? How do I build a theory about the things that I think will result in improvement? And then how do I build a measurement system so I can have a family of run charts or Shewhart statistical process control charts that will inform me about whether my results are producing improvement? How am I going to do that? What are those things? And then how do I go through that process of using PDSAs? It's applying some of the basic thinking around designing a project. It's accessing some of the core essential improvement methods and applying them to your work to learn and starting to get experience with being able to do improvement work. Really, really important. And there are a lot of people that get empowered through doing those kinds of programs, and they don't take a lot of time. But then you also need to be able to bring a whole host of tools. So I mentioned for us, this is actually an appendix that comes out of the improvement guide. It's a list of all the common tools that are used in improvement. In the die-hard world, we often say there are 7 essential quality tools. If you Google search that, you'll find it on the American Society of Quality, or you'll find it on Wikipedia. There were 7 original tools that were often frequently used at the front line. These are some additional ones that we also think that are helpful. But these are the tools that we want to bring to teams as they're doing their work. Things that they can access and say, gosh, I want to understand variation. How can I work with that? I want to learn more about the system I'm working on. How do I collect some information? It doesn't take a full giant bat belt of tools in order to be a good improver. You don't have to have belts or suspenders or any of those things. You just need a few tools and a little bit of knowledge and a lot of opportunity to be able to explore them. When you do that, when you're out there doing projects, we also recognize, you heard Amar mentioning the idea of having coaches. These are people that help you work through your project, help you keep focus on the aim, support you when you reach barriers or challenges, or where you're spinning your wheels on the same idea and you need a little bit of unsticking. They're folks that support you to figure out how do you work around organizational barriers or talk to your leaders, or what are the things that will enable you to be successful. They are there to help you with added improvement experience, added improvement knowledge, and help those teams move forward. At higher levels, there are people that need to be deeper experts in improvement. So we at IHI, we call them improvement advisors. These are people that spend a great deal of time learning very, very deep knowledge of the basics of improvement, also a lot about data and understanding variation. I mentioned how important that is of having a clear appreciation for statistical process control chart and the theories that Walter Schuhart brought in terms of understanding variation and how do we act and learn from our data and how do we use that in such a way. And then also some of the sophisticated ways of saying how do we actually bring the ideas of planned experimentation into our work? How do we test different ideas in complex ways in a way that we can actually learn rapidly about what works and what doesn't work? And these folks are often the ones that help support a number of teams. They help set strategy. They help us to think about how we link our work together and do it in an effective way. And we need fewer of these folks, but we need them. We need people that have a deep knowledge. This was a theory that we built as we thought about different ways when we think about roles of people. So you'll see each of the programs that are tied to those different types of people and how they go, the durations change from ones that are a few hours to ones that are months. And it's an idea of trying to, we sort of think about it as a candle, that each of these programs actually teaches the exact same theories and principles. The difference is the depth and the level of complexity that goes with it. And people often make their journey through these different programs, and we call it like dipping a candle, that you keep dipping it until you get to the end, and then you become this sort of fully functional improvement person. Now, the last piece I want to kind of close on is this idea of, in addition to building the skills and ability, is the learning system that wraps around it. Now, you might look at this and immediately say, that kind of looks like a PDSA cycle or a cycle in general. And Walter Schuhart and Dr. Deming, Edwards Deming, were not the only ones that could figure out how to write things in circles. This is from David Kolb, who talks about experiential learning. And the same concept when we're thinking about our organizations is we want to figure out how to build a learning organization. We want to build the ability that these people that get skills and tools that go into your organization and they're trying to apply them to projects and to real processes and to real people have the ability and have a process that enables them to stop and pause and look at what they planned or thought they were going to do and reflect on it and say, what happened versus what I thought was going to happen? And then take that knowledge and say, gosh, are there things that I might do differently or that we should build upon so that we can improve as we go along? And then apply that to the work that we're doing. So as Amar was describing, when they were going over their journey of multiple years, the leadership team was stopping and reflecting and saying, what's working, what's not? What do we need to add? What do we need to subtract? How do we expand the support because we're reaching the boundaries of where we can go? They were learning as they were doing so that they didn't stop the momentum of the growth of their improvement capacity. They didn't stop the potential that they had, but they made sure that they built in the process to observe, pay attention, adjust, and continue to make it better. And I would argue that if we grilled him at the end of this, he would say that they're still doing that. Whether it's daily or monthly or quarterly or semi-annually, they're going through a process where there's a constant focus on learning. And that was one of the key lessons of improvement science, was that it's about us being able to learn so that we can deeply improve. So I'm going to stop there because I'm 30 seconds early, and that's almost unheard of. So I want to put this on my control chart of times I finished early. But thank you so much for joining us. We'll be sticking around here if anybody has any questions or thoughts. We hope this was useful, and feel free to reach out to us or give us feedback, and good luck in your journey, and enjoy the rest of the forum.